Hello, everybody. It's Chip Rogers. I'm the president and CEO of the American Hotel and Lodging Association. Thank you so much for being with us today. We have a very special program for you as we kind of kick off 2022. Yeah, I know it's underway, but we've got a lot to talk about how this industry can get back to profitability for 2022. Now, if you're not in the industry, you might not know these staggering numbers, but if you look at 2020 and 2021 combined, you're talking about losses in our industry in well in excess of $100 billion. Yes, some markets, some hotels have done well. Some have even slightly done better. But in general, in totality, the industry's lost a lot of money. So what do we do now in a new world with a new type of traveler that's looking for a new experience to make sure we get back to profitability? Well, I've got the experts here to talk about it today. Aaron Olson, who is the Senior Vice President of Hotel Operations at Crestline Hotels and Resorts. Ron Lohman is the Senior Vice President of Operations at Real Hospitality Group. Nan Cummings is the Chief Operating Officer at Intermountain Management. And one of my dear friends, always entertaining, Del Ross is Chief Revenue Officer at Hotel Effectiveness. Now, this program today is going to last about an hour long, somewhere around that ballpark. And you're invited to participate. There's a Q&A box. All of you have done this before. We've all done tons of Zooms. If you have questions, please put them into the Q&A box. And a couple of times during the program today, I will stop, see what those questions are, and ask them of our guests. This will be a conversation, a dialogue back and forth. It's not just going to be me asking questions and getting direct answers. It's really going to be all of us participating. But the good thing about this program, this Hot Topics program, is that it will be in the February issue of Hotel Business that you can find at hotelbusiness.com, also on social media, LinkedIn and Twitter. Now, I've got to thank our sponsor, because none of these work without a sponsor. And our sponsor today is Hotel Effectiveness for this panel. And the guy that runs the show there, Del Ross, is going to start us off with some really interesting information on what is happening in our industry and some of the pertinent items on how we can take this information and use it for profitability in 2022. So Del, it's all yours.
Great. Thank you very much, Chip. And I appreciate the intro to the company and the opportunity to be with these really prestigious operators who have been highly successful in some of the most difficult trading conditions we've ever seen. So I'm going to be sharing just a few stats today. These are debuting now. No one's seen these, so you in the audience and the panelists are seeing this information for the very first time. We have data about labor that we've been publishing with the AHLA throughout the pandemic, and will continue to do so into the future. It's based on over 5,000 hotels worth of real data. So this is actually live data from actual hotels. It's not survey, it's nothing else. And we're sharing this to you fresh today. First time anyone has seen this. Now, we've been tracking, the first thing I'm going to show you is the labor recovery. We've been tracking the employment levels for the industry since the beginning of COVID. As the AHLA has estimated, there are about 8.3 million people who normally work in the hotel industry in the US on a given year. It's around 3% of all jobs in our economy, which is huge. We lost most of those jobs at the start of COVID. We are actually down to less than 80% of those jobs. 80% were gone. And the worst part, which was April 2020. We clawed our way back. A year ago, we were at about 44%. And then with the leisure surge that we saw starting last March, we saw a rapid response and a recovery of staffing levels. Actually, it was a little less than we thought. We peaked in October at about 71% of pre-COVID staffing levels. That's tapered a little bit. That's largely due to normal seasonality and a little bit of suppression because of the Omicron surge. We do expect that to come back up and for our progress back to regular staffing levels to continue through this year. I don't think we're going to get to full staffing by the end of this year for a couple of reasons we'll get into, but we are making that march. We still have about 2.5 million jobs that existed pre-COVID that don't exist today. Some of those will come back, not all. All right, next thing we want to talk about in addition to staffing is the productivity. Productivity is kind of challenging to measure across hotels. So we created a metric we call hours per occupied room, similar to RevPAR. Occupancy is the key driver of labor requirements for our industry, and HPOR is the stat that can be used to compare one hotel against another. Pre-COVID, a full service hotel required around 3 hours of labor for every occupied room, and a select service hotel required a little less than 1.5 hours of labor per occupied room. This dropped dramatically during COVID, mostly because we eliminated nearly all food and beverage positions, and we eliminated stay-over cleans. Those two things combined to see a substantial, about a 30%, 33% drop in labor requirements per occupied room. Last year, it actually went down even as hotels were recovering. This was actually because of the lack of labor that was available rather than the demand for labor, the need for labor. At the end of the year, though, as the hiring caught up to demand, we saw the gradual return of labor requirements, labor per occupied room return, and we are projecting that we'll get nearly back to where we were at the pre-pandemic levels by the end of this year. Why is this important? Well, as we're going into the new year, as hotels are planning their budgets and their forecasts, they need to budget for higher hours per occupied room labor requirements for the business that we're going to get. If we try if we forecast based on the low point of labor requirements, we're going to end up creating a budget challenge and a profitability challenge that is going to be hard to make up. So we want to be basing our budget on reality. So we're at about 2.3 hours of per occupied room for full service and 1.2 today. That's going to get up to nearly 3 hours for full service and nearly 2 hours the select service should be about 1.5 hours of labor for select service. Okay, so that's HPR. It's a complex topic, but it's important that people begin to understand that. Another hot topic, wages. We track wages. We get real-time data on wages. We actually provide this as a service to many of our subscribing hotels. Is a nice, inexpensive legal way to get competing wage data for their market. This data is national data, so I can actually share with you up to the minute information about this. Room attendant wages, we all know, have been going up and up and up across the board in every market. On average, room attendants are now making over $14.39 an hour as of the end of December. And we're expecting that to continue to grow by at least 10%. It's actually going to be up a little higher than that as we get into the surge this coming spring, because we're going to see another demand surge. That's really high. We are also tracking all the other major positions. You see a lot of pressure on every role and wage pressure going up for every single role in a hotel. Throughout this past year, we saw guest services and room attendants and other guest-facing roles saw the greatest increases. That dissipated a little bit in December just because of the lack of the reduced demand through seasonality and Omicron. That's going to go back up again. So we're actually going to see those wage rates return, but we saw this across the board. One comment about general manager that you'll see in a second when I show new hire wages, that looks like it's the lowest of these major positions. It's a little deceptive, and it's being dragged down by new hire wages, and I'll show you that next. But this is a good indicator of where things stand. We have data for local markets, so you see that QR code. If you scan that and ask me for information about a snapshot of local market conditions, I can send that to you. It'll pop up an email box. The new hire wages. Now, this is different than the average I showed you before. The average before was all positions, whether they're tenured or new hires. This is just a look at new hire wages, people who've been in their job for less than 90 days. And we see that in general, these wages have grown faster than they grew for overall wages. That is the result of the competition for new staff. And it's a reflection of the reality that we're hiring people who did not work in our industry before, and we're having to attract them with extra high wages. New hire wages are, of course, below the average wage because tenured people get paid more. But we need to track this because, first, we need to be competitive. Second, these new hire wages will drive up our tenured hire wages and our supervisory position wages. We need to be aware of that. I mentioned before about general manager new hire wages being down. You see here, that's true. They're down versus prior historic levels. That isn't because people are willing to work for less. It's because we're actually hiring less experienced people in these new GM positions. Newly hired GMs are younger, they're less experienced, and they command lower pay. But that also means that they have less experience, and that is manifest in other areas. You either have to make up for that with more experienced supervisory positions or other things. So that's something important to consider. All right. The other item I wanted to discuss today, I've got two more things. Hotel turnover. We are a high turnover industry. We see in general some of the highest turnover of any customer facing service industry that's out there. During COVID, it got a lot worse. This is all position turnover, right? You see 2019 pre-COVID levels. In 2019, we had a labor crunch. People don't remember this, but we ended 2019 with 1 million unfilled jobs in our industry in the U.S. and record low unemployment. That caused a problem, and we were still seeing crazy turnover. We're seeing now, this past year, turnover at record levels above 2019, when we were in a turnover crisis. During the summer, during the leisure demand periods, late spring and summer, we saw the highest ever. And I actually have a breakdown that I'm not sharing in this presentation of the guest-facing positions. Housekeeping turnover and guest services turnover was in the high triple digits. It was ridiculous during those times, in part because these were new people to the industry. We were throwing them right into very high demand jobs they'd never worked in before, and we were burning them out really fast. Fortunately, that calmed down a bit. We were able to catch up with our hiring, reinstate some of our onboarding efforts. So by the end of the year, we had calmed down our retention and our turnover issues, but it's still incredibly high, and we need to be paying attention to that because, as I mentioned here on the slide, every time you have to refill a position, it costs you an extra 30% per year. By the way, these numbers, these are annualized turnover rates. This isn't the actual turnover for the month, it's the annual rate. So if you see 100% turnover, that means we lost about 8% of the workforce during that month. And if it had continued, it would have been everybody. All right, the final stat, and I know I'm throwing a lot out there, but we're gonna have a great lively conversation shortly. And stayover cleans, hot topic in our industry. Where do they stand? So during COVID, nearly all stayover cleans went away. Not all, but almost all stayover cleans went away. This was because the guests didn't want us in their rooms for fear of COVID, and the staff didn't want to go into the rooms of people who might have COVID. It was just a safety measure. They're coming back. And it's really important that we prepare for this for all kinds of reasons as we go into this year. Will they come back to pre-COVID levels? Probably not. Actually, we've got more and more people who are opting out, and we are now for many categories, especially select service, we're asking people to opt in. This is going to result in a lower level of as we get back to steady state, a lower steady state than before. The column to the left, the 2019 column, should be considered the pre-COVID norm, where 72.8% of full service stayovers were cleaned, as opposed to 32% today. So we didn't clean all stayovers before, but we cleaned most of them. Same for select service and extended stay. Because of the model, we cleaned less than half. We're actually back up to nearly 36% of pre-COVID levels for extended stay, 44% of pre-COVID levels for full service, and 29% for select service, and that will increase. We think that full service will get back up as high as 80% of pre-COVID levels by the end of 2019 or 2022. We think that select service may get up to 60%, depending on how the opt-in process works and whether brands mandate this. And for extended stay, it may return to pre-COVID levels, but again, we're probably looking at about 50-60% of pre-COVID volume of stayover cleans. Hot topics. Again, if you scan this, you'll get the deck that for all the slides that I've prepared. So look forward to the conversation with the rest of the team on this. And now I'll turn it back over to Chip.
No, thanks so much. Outstanding information. We did have a question on select service, why the labor was going to jump per room this year so significantly. I think almost a half an hour more on select service. Is that because of the information you showed on the last slide, that the stayover cleans are happening more frequently?
For select service, stayover cleans are going to add back, again, this is on average per occupied room, they're going to add back somewhere around 8 to 10 minutes of labor. And we do have food and beverage roles in select service hotels, we will be adding back more food and beverage labor, because breakfast bars, even the ones that, as we reopen them, we tended to avoid hot food items as long as we could. A lot of those are going to come back out. The need for attendance is going to rise, and the use of those services is going to require more people to clean the areas for select service hotels. So that combination is going to add somewhere between 20 and 30 minutes of labor per occupied room by the end of this year.
Wow, that's
and again, that's for select service.
Right. And when you layer on that on top of the significantly increasing wages, that's a serious cost. And as you mentioned all the time, you've got to be prepared for that. I want to segue into our first question for the entire panel, and Del did a fantastic job really honing in on labor and the cost of labor and what labor is going to look like in 2022 and how much it's going to begin resembling 2019. But the industry has certainly changed. The typical hotel guest has actually changed a little bit since 2019. So as you look to 2022 from an operational standpoint, what are the 2 or 3 biggest things that you are preparing for, you're concerned about, maybe even some opportunities? I'll start with Ron and we'll go around the horn. Ron?
Hey, good morning, Chip. I think hiring and retaining future hospitality leaders is really one of the things that I'm most concerned about. I mean, it's really finding those individuals that really where we can ignite the passion for hospitality. We're seeing a big challenge with general managers, and I think Dell's illustration showed that. So training's key as well. A lot of the associates that we do have now have never worked in the hospitality industry. So that's certainly a focus. And then the last thing I try to work with our operations teams is really focusing on process, the right process, because I think if you have the right processes in place, you'll drive the productivity, the guest satisfaction, and the guest trust. And sometimes it's busy, right? We all got a million things. So we lose sight of that processes sometimes. So really focusing on those with the teams.
Nan, same question. What are you at Intermountain planning for 2022 as the major issues that you're facing in operations?
Well, really for us, I think it's what everyone's dealing with. It's staffing and the food costs that go up, which obviously shrinks our profit. But I think this kind of, Al said I could take just a minute to talk about culture. And I think really, with Intermountain, we've put in some incentives, a retention bonus, a signing bonus, and a referral bonus. But I think really what has kept our people with us, we'll celebrate 40 years in April. And so we've really, along with our competitive wages, we have retained our above property staff throughout the entire process. We ended up with our 82 hotels losing about 3 GMs, and 2 of them just left the industry. One really just quit for a while. Actually, I'm happy to say she's coming back in a couple of weeks in a different role. But I believe it's our people, our above property team. It starts with our leader, Dewey. Obviously, he just simply gets culture, and it penetrates down to our properties. And I mean, I think that's really our niche. I think, the bonuses we put in place, the incentives, they worked, but then there's always that incentive across the street that takes them. But I know it's our people. And we have had our above property staff, which entails about 9 folks. They've all been with us 7+ years. And really during this event of COVID, we retained all of them. We didn't reduce salaries, but I had probably 90% of them offer to give up part of their salary just to help the company. So I think that gets sometimes ignored, but I think culture is key. And I think, we haven't experienced the turnover that a lot of people have. And it's not because we're perfect and we make certainly our fair share of mistakes, but I think it's just, we try to stay consistent and do the right thing. And I think that's what differentiates us. And we have not, now line level, yes, we've had a lot of turnover, but again, our GMs have stayed with us. They've, to me, just done an amazing job getting through these hard times. And, we continue just to band closer together. We've been through several ups and downs. So, but, I would just say we have been very competitive with our wage, and then just trying to stay with the culture piece of it. So.
That I don't know that I've heard too many companies say that they have a culture that is so strong that employees are actually willing to take less to help out the company. That is pretty amazing. Congratulations on that. That's not something that happens overnight. That takes decades to build, and you guys have done an amazing job.
Mhm.
Aaron, same question. 2022, what's top of your list for things that concern you?
Yeah, it's first of all, it's funny that Nan mentioned that. We had a few veteran GMs that did the same thing early on. They said, "Hey, I'll take a pay cut if that helps." And it was just, you're stunned that
Right.
be that unselfish. Um, I think it really falls into three buckets. I know everybody wants to hear probably something new, but labor is it. That's just it, and it's really the entry level positions. And Dell certainly highlighted many of those, starting with room attendants being the primary challenge. And I think what ties into that the rising guest expectations, which Dell also dove into, and that's one that makes us, I think, very, very nervous. Guests are paying more, right, for their stays. They are no longer forgiving. We're well past them being forgiving in terms of COVID reasons for having amenities closed, not offering services. We are well beyond that. Guests do not want to hear it. They don't care that we're understaffed. They want a great hotel experience, and in many ways, they want an experience that exceeds what they had pre-pandemic. Right? They're when they get out of that house, they can't wait. They are looking forward to that trip. They are so thankful to just get away. And so those rising expectations and the pressure that puts on our teams while we're battling, with the staffing crisis, that's certainly a challenge. So, we've taken the past few months to really, focus on the training piece, the development piece. I know Ron spoke a little bit about this, but we've got to get everybody retrained. We got to get out of pandemic mode where our staff, really many, got really beat up. It was rough, right? And so we've got to somehow get back to hospitality, right, and providing that wonderful, warm, sincere service and an experience that guests can count on. And I would say, lastly, supply chain. I don't want to hype that one up too much because, quite honestly, it just pales in comparison to the labor challenges. We can source another brand of soap, but if a general manager only has 3 housekeepers on the schedule and 100 rooms to clean, there's no magic solution for that. They are losing sleep, right? So those are the few buckets I would say are top of mind.
Two things that were brought up there I want to follow up with. Nan mentioned this, so gentlemen, I'll ask you, and I know, Dell, this is probably not something that you measure, but even anecdotally, have you heard about people who have left the industry during the pandemic, gone somewhere else, let's say a shipping warehouse or something like that, and then come back because they miss hospitality? Have just anecdotal stories. Have you heard any of that? That may be a no.
I can actually tell you that generally that is not happening at the line level, right? I think there are some examples of people who put in their time and they've earned the right to be a GM. And I have heard some stories about GMs who've returned because hotel gets in your blood. But for line level positions, we aren't seeing it. We actually saw the opposite. The people who left us or were let go in April of 2020 that were not brought back in the summer of 2020 are gone for good. They have found other ways to make pretty good money with sometimes less stress, and they like it. So we have actually kind of gone through a whole segment of the workforce that probably will not come back to us, and these are in those critical line level roles.
Yeah, and I think that really speaks to what Aaron mentioned a moment ago. We've got to get back to training when we do our surveys and find out why people are either leaving or not wanting to come into the industry. A lot of it is around training. They feel like that they're tossed into the fire. They've had very little understanding of what exactly they're supposed to do. They get frustrated, they get confused, and ultimately they leave. And that's, of course, accentuating those turnover rates that you mentioned a moment ago. Another topic that Aaron touched on briefly, and while it's not as important as labor, I do want to get everyone's feelings on the supply chain challenges. We do our front desk feedback on a regular basis where we are getting survey information from our almost 30,000 members, and almost 90% of them have had and experienced some sort of supply chain disruption over the last few months. I want to hear we'll start with Nan. Are you seeing any of that? Ron, are you seeing any of that? And if you are, how much is it impacting your operations?
I would say yes. Oh, go ahead.
Matt.
Well, I was going to piggyback on Aaron. Yes, we do. We are seeing that, but we can certainly find something to replace what we're unable to get. They've gotten very creative, and it's not always going to hit brand standards, but it does keep our guests in the rooms and keeps revenue there. So I don't have any specifics, but I do know even we're opening 3 or 4 hotels. I think it's 4 between now and the end of second quarter. And I know from that perspective, just from, getting the supplies in for new builds has been a challenge. But again, we have a young lady who's been with us for close to 20 years, and she's kind of a one-person show, and she's just been able to make it happen. So that's, yeah, I would just say that's it. We're able to improvise.
Ron, what about you?
I think it's when the labor shortages hit our purveyors really where it's most. We had a situation where we had due to a event was running full, and the food purveyor called the chef and the general manager and said, I know you have a delivery on Wednesday, and this was Monday, but we can't get there. So if you want your food, you got to come get it. And that was about an hour and 15 minutes away. So when you drop things like that on these hotels that are already stretched to the limit, that's where you get the stress. So those situations are really tough. It's tough for the whole staff to manage. And that's where they really, like I said, they got to come together as a team and really to face those challenges. But yeah, it's tough out there. But I agree with Aaron, if it's a bar soap or something like that, we can get that from someone else. It's when we get these last minute things dropped on them, it makes it really, really tough for the teams in the field.
Yeah, and to Nan's point a moment ago, in talking to a lot of folks who really specialize in development, the supply chain disruptions are really around the new builds. Clearly, operationally, as you mentioned, there are going to be things that become a challenge, but you hear of the time that it takes now to build a hotel has been extended dramatically because you can't get the items you need, from lumber all the way to appliances, right? Del, we had a question, and I wanted to help clear this up for everybody. The question centered around how you and where you're getting your information from. Is your information on labor and wages coming directly from hotel employees, or does it also include contracted employees at the hotel?
So we get data from the actual payroll and time and attendance systems, as well as the hotel P&L. So it does include, when I talk about the labor requirements, the hours requirement, that incorporates all labor irrespective of source, whether that source is the full-time people, like salaried employees, hourly overtime, or contract. It's all of that boiled down to a time required per occupied room. I also saw a question about if you have a food and beverage outlet that gets a lot of outside business, do you use occupied room? For the US, in general, hours per occupied room is a very useful tool. When you're actually planning at runtime an individual hotel and an individual outlet, and you're using labor standards to forecast your needs, you're going to use a locally appropriate driver, which might be some other thing besides occupancy. This is just a general way of looking at it, similar to the way that RevPAR is a good general way of comparing one hotel against another.
Right. Good point. So we have a question from a Maine hotelier that really talks about how do we change the narrative around what it means to have a hospitality career. She was mentioning that in Maine, they're starting a program, and we're doing this here at AHLA as well, to really change that narrative, talk about lifetime earnings, which in hospitality are actually fairly significant, very competitive, and the career opportunities and the speed with which you can climb that ladder in our industry. I wanted to hear from each of you, when you're trying to convince someone that they need to come into the hotel industry, that they can build a successful, happy career that is fulfilling to them in their life. What are you saying? How are you playing that? Because I know that's so important. And we'll start with you, Aaron.
Yeah, so very, very important question. We ask our general manager to share some of those stories as they're interviewing folks, and perhaps it's them, right, that started as a front desk agent or a night auditor in college and helped to kind of show the way that they grew through the industry, or maybe it's a housekeeping manager that started as a room attendant. So I think the more that we can share those stories, and I could say we need to do a better job of that. I started on the grounds crew at a Marriott golf course, right? I never intended to get into hospitality, right? But I did that as I was working through college, and ended up, going to work at a hotel and all the way up. So I think the more that we can share those stories, especially for folks that are within those hotels, and show those examples, I think that really helps to spotlight that there absolutely is a path. And that's a responsibility, I think that we have.
Nan, let me flip the question to you. You talked a lot about the really special culture that has been developed over decades at Intermountain. When you're convincing someone or recruiting someone into your company, and looking to convince them that a career in hospitality is really the way to go. Are you really focused on what Intermountain does? Are you focused on what the industry can provide them, or some combination of the two?
It's a really good question. Quite honestly, we have them come to us. I have had the privilege of maybe within the last 10 years of going to one person to have them join the team. So it's more, our company does more organic growth. It's internal. There's a lot of opportunity for GMs to grow into an area manager, which then can transition into a regional director of operations. So we're fortunate, honestly, Chip, that we have not had to do a lot of that. I think they see the opportunity within the company. We have some programs that our vice president of training has put in place. We call it an AGM Climbing Mountains program. So it's a process they go through it's kind of a grueling 1 year. They go through some training and then they have to really for about the next year be available to drop everything tomorrow and go bench a hotel. So we just have a lot of internal tools that we use that I really think, again, I think it helps build the culture because all of our above property folks have done that. They've been those people that have been bench managers for a year or two and been away from their families for 2 months. So I really have been fortunate that we've not had to go out and tell our story. I guess really it's kind of just more internal, and then anything external is just really pretty much word of mouth. So we're fortunate.
Ron, what about you? Any new tactics that you're using through the pandemic and coming out of the pandemic to recruit and retain employees?
Our mentorship program at Real Hospitality Group has proved to do very well. We have a robust team of above property and some of our general managers that help foster those relationships with those individuals that come through. So I think that's one thing that's really helped us as well. And I would agree, I think sharing the success that you've experienced in your career is really what makes it. So really talking about the industry and what the industry's done for you. I'm kind of a believer in that. If you do those right things, then the rest of it kind of falls into place. So, sharing that, really igniting that passion. I really worry about our mid-level. I think as business rebounds, we're going to start to see more of that pain than maybe we did in some other areas. So finding those next mid-level leaders within our hotels has got to be a focus for all of us.
Del, you obviously track this. You gave a great presentation of what has happened. Have you heard, even anecdotally, what has been working to retain those workers so we don't see that triple-digit turnover rate on an annual basis?
Well, every single hotel company talks about culture at some point, but the way we can actually tell the difference between the ones that truly have a managed and curated culture versus just saying it and assuming that the good spirits of hospitality will carry them through is going to be in turnover. And we see a dramatic difference there. We work with most of the largest hotel management companies, and the ones that actually have very relatively low turnover all have very precise and intentional onboarding and training processes that are not just about how to do the job. They're about why you're doing the job, why it matters, and why we as a company do it better than anyone else in this particular way. It actually takes more time. It's an investment in the person versus the needs of the hotel, but it's reflected in dramatically lower turnover rates. The big companies that are investing in true onboarding and spreading of their culture, education about what it's like, what they're all about, they're seeing turnover rates that can be less than half of the industry average or less than half of their peers their training program is, here's how you clean a room. Here's how you work the computer, right? It's very, very different. So I want to really support what Nan is saying, because we're seeing that with real data, company versus company.
That's helpful, very helpful. I want to flip to what is 2022 going to look like? What are you forecasting for your hotels? Obviously, 2020, we were in no man's land. No one even had any idea what was coming next. 2021, I think there was enormous pent-up demand that coincided with the vaccines being spread across the US, and that led to incredible leisure demand throughout the late spring and summer. And then, of course, variants start hitting and we go back on this roller coaster. Now we're into 2022, third year of dealing with this. What are you forecasting? And if there's going to be another big leisure travel boom. When is that going to happen? I'll start with you, Aaron.
Yeah, so last year we saw leisure start to take off around President's Day weekend. That was a big one for us, combined with Valentine's Day, and I think really gave us just a really clear signal on what was to come. That was the first kind of just really big wave of leisure that it hit across the country. So we're expecting something similar. I think most experts are expecting that Omicron cases are going to start, coming down somewhere around mid-February, and I think that pent-up demand still exists. So it's going to kick off mid-February. Spring breaks in March going to be big. We are absolutely optimistic that leisure demand will be just as strong, if not stronger, than last year. We expect to see ADR growth on that. I think the key is this year, as opposed to last year, we didn't trust it, right? We didn't trust it until it was here. And so from a labor planning perspective, I can say we weren't as prepared as we should have been. And I think that goes for most of the industry. This year, completely different approach. We are banking on the fact that it's going to happen. So all of our plans and processes have been in place for the last few months preparing for that. But yeah, we're expecting a big wave of leisure demand to come.
Mm-hmm. Nan, what about you? Same question.
Well, yeah, I was just going to echo that, Aaron. We were not prepared last year either. We were closing inventory as we speak. I mean, it was truly a tidal wave that came that we weren't anticipating. So really what we're doing right now is just monitoring our booking window and group pays and just over communicating with operations from our revenue team to the properties of what they're anticipating to come so that we can be prepared, because just like you, we were not prepared last year. So.
Ron, same question, but Nan mentioned group activity. Are you seeing any return in group?
Very light. So not a big push there. But we're really looking and studying forecasts and data points that we never really looked at before, whether that's data from TSA, checkpoints, World Health Organization, and really looking at search data. I think right now the booking window is so irregular and people are very hesitant to book, but people are still planning. They're still thinking about that. And I think Aaron made a good point. As we come out of this last variant, it's very different than when we came out of the first one. So I think that's going to play a big key role. But we're looking at search data in some markets where we're seeing the search that's higher than it was in 19, 20, and 21. And those markets, we know what's coming. So to Aaron and Nan's point, there again, do we got to focus on making sure we have the right rate position strategy, but also the right labor strategy, because that's probably going to be where a lot more of the work is going to come in. So very much looking at all those data points.
So Del, I want to have you chime in on this topic, because if we're all saying, and I think I'm hearing a common theme here, early spring, we're about to get hit again with a whole lot of leisure. First, do you concur with that? And second, what should you be doing on labor planning to prepare for that?
So there's no question that last year we referred to this as revenge travel, right? Well, revenge travel 2.0, which will begin this March, is going to be bigger. And part of the reason for that is we now have over 200 million people who are fully vaccinated in the United States. Thanks to Omicron, another 40 or 50 million people will have recently had COVID and have at least temporary immunity. So we have a massive number of people who are feeling bulletproof. Everybody who didn't take a trip last year just on optimism alone is going to feel really good about booking travel, and they're doing it right now, and it's going to hit us really hard. The difference between this year and last year is that hotels have no excuse for not being prepared for it. Nobody should be complaining about not having enough staff, because we need to be modeling this now and starting the hiring and onboarding process now for the spring, so that we're not trying to play catch up all year. This is really important. In addition, we need to use weekly dynamic staffing and planning models so that we can actually adjust our staffing with this wildly fluctuating occupancy day by day, every single day, so we don't have to close rooms for sale. Most hotels in the US, even the ones that were doing well, were closing anywhere from 3 to 5 rooms a night that they couldn't sell because they couldn't clean them. We need to solve for that by actually just staffing better, actually having more adequate staffing. You don't want to have the same staff every Monday just because you always do it that way. You want to staff it to demand. And you have to use data to come up with a room rolling strategy that is not gut, it's actually data driven. Room rolling used to be a thing you just don't do, right? You clean every room every day. That's not feasible, but you can actually have, if you know what your occupancy is going to be for the next 4 nights, you can know how many rooms you need to clean each day and which ones you can carry over to the next day when you can get more team members, when you have more available labor, and still be prepared and not have to close rooms. That's huge. And again, with careful planning and good data, hotels should do a lot better this spring, even than last year in those record-setting markets.
So Dell touched on, go ahead, Ron.
I was it's funny that Dell brings that up because I talk a lot with our operation leaders, and you know, your recruiting and staffing plan needs to be as detailed as your top line revenue plan has. I mean, you need to talk about it every single week. I mean, it has to be that detailed.
That's right.
Really, really good point. Dell talked about Omicron and the cases are through the roof. Luckily, the hospitalizations and death rate is not what it was under the previous variants, but it has certainly impacted getting workers to show up for work. How are you dealing with COVID no-shows? And hopefully this won't be a problem a month from now, but it is happening right now. How are you dealing with that from an operations standpoint? Aaron, I'll start with you.
Well, I'll say that the revised CDC guidance going down to a 5-day quarantine and isolation really, I think, saved us that the last week of December, first couple of weeks of January. So we had a few hotels here that had to restrict a little bit of inventory, but we really were able to avoid any catastrophes. So that helped. If it was still the 10-day quarantine, we would have been in trouble. But certainly, I don't want to downplay also the impact that this has had on our hotel teams. It certainly is real in terms of people, again, having to step up and do more with less to get us through this crunch time.
Nan, any thoughts on dealing with no-shows because of COVID?
Really just kind of to echo that, we've appreciated the 5-day quarantine period as well, but I would just say it's our salaried people that are stepping in. Our bench managers are going to different properties. Our regionals are heading out to their properties and just working. So, and when we have to, we close inventory. We opened a new hotel in San Luis Obispo about 6 weeks ago, and I think we ended up one day waking up with 2 or 3 people to work. And you know, you sit there and you think we just opened a new hotel and we've got to close about 30% inventory. That's not a good conversation to have with our owner, but at the end of the day, the value of your employees, you just, you know, for one moment I stepped into that world of, well, we can't close rooms because of revenue. And then all of a sudden you go, no, we can, because we've got people that have already worked, 12-hour days. It's time to just, cut our losses, let them go home and appreciate them really at the end of the day. So it's been tough, Chip. It's just but I think the beauty of it, if there's anything good, we've all, again, as a company, banded together. And I think just the fact that everybody's going through it, there's slight comfort in that, just that we're not alone and that we'll all just figure out how to plow through it. So,
Ron, how about you guys?
For us, I think a little bit of this came organically, but we really focused on it too, was cross-training. So having those associates that could work those various different departments. As I've gone through the hotels in the last 30 days, you certainly are seeing folks that you typically would see in a food and beverage role that are maybe up and helping clean rooms, or vice versa, or a person that's at the desk that you now see setting up a banquet room. So cross-training associates they're like gold right now.
That's a good point.
Dell, you've got some numbers on this and on how big the impact has been from Omicron. You're on mute.
We started tracking this, so we have the data on no-shows, but we wanted to see just recently. We haven't published this data, but we started looking at the impact of the no-show trends and what's happening. It's actually pretty dramatic. No-show is always a problem for our line level positions. We just know it. It's part of the business. So far in January, and that's when it tracks to the Omicron surge. We're seeing 20 to 30% higher no-show rates than we've ever seen before at this same time in the year. And we have data going back 14 years. We're seeing incredible high spikes, and it's COVID. It's all Omicron, people getting sick and not coming to work. Even with the shorter time frame to when you can return to work, you're still seeing people getting sick and they're not able to come in. So we're starting to give guidance, informal guidance today, that you need to plan for this. If a surge is happening or a surge is going to happen, you need to staff up or schedule more people than you need. Almost like in revenue management, you oversell because you know there's going to be no-show guests. You need to overstaff. That is tricky. That's actually really scary to do, because if they all show up, you've got excess labor. But more than likely, in a time like today, you're going to feel better about it and not have to close rooms to arrival.
Great, really good point. Something that is in the news virtually every day. If you recall, earlier this year, we heard a lot about inflation, and then economists were telling us they were using this word transitory, whatever that means. I'm not sure how that's exactly defined, but I think most Americans have realized it's here to stay, and it's absolutely impacting everything that we do in our industry. How are you pricing for inflation? I'll start with you, Ron.
Well, we really try to look at our cost of goods and how that's rising, both on the room side and in food and beverage, and really analyzing, our menu pricing in food and beverage. It obviously goes into the calculation of what we're selling. And the second part of that, I think what's driving a lot of costs is our current purveyors that we've used for certain things. When we can't get it, we go to an alternate. And more than not, whenever I analyze those things, we're paying a premium. I mean, I had a hotel that I saw buying cleaning supplies from their food purveyor, and they're paying like 40% more than they were, but that's the only place they could get it at the time. So there's lots of obstacles like that out there.
Man, what about you?
From just a rate perspective, is that what you're referring to?
Yeah, and how it's being impacted by inflation.
Well, we're just, again, monitoring it market by market. I would say we're just trying to stay competitive with our comp set. And I would say that our revenue team as a whole, we've kind of restructured that into where they're working closely together and just trying to maximize the ADR per property. That's really the best answer I have for that, because it's just been somewhat inconsistent, I would say, over the last few months. So some of the tools we've used in the past have not been that helpful. So we're just working together to try to see how we can maximize that.
Aaron, how are you dealing with inflation?
Yeah, a couple of things. One, we've been, constantly battling the right balance of occupancy versus ADR, right? And so that's led us to looking at GOP per available room, in many cases more than just RevPAR, to offset the wage increases, benefit increases, inflation, et cetera. Food and beverage, we're doing quarterly, price surveys of menus for both outlets and catering, as opposed to we used to do annual, during the budgeting process. So we're doing that much more frequently now to ensure that our menu prices reflect the new cost of goods.
Yeah.
I want to go back to the topic that we started with. I'm going to start with Del again on this one. Pre-pandemic, you mentioned from information that we'd put out that there was 1 million job openings in our industry. But if you thought about the economy then, that was very strong. For the most part, you're competing when you're hiring someone into our industry with other hotels. Now we're in a position where the labor challenge is so acute across the entire economy that you're now competing with, again, the Amazons of the world, the Walmarts of the world. How do hotels need to look at this new world and when they're determining what those wages should be?
That's a really good point. And we lost sight of that last year when we were just busily trying to staff up to demand and hiring anybody we could get and using only wages as a tool to attract. People who join this industry and stay in this industry don't do it for the money alone, especially now with so many other jobs out there that I would argue are not as hard, that are maybe not as lonely at times, and pay just as well or better. They do this because of the greater purpose that we serve, right? The goal, the role of lodging and hospitality. It's a very important function in the world. But we have to recognize that. And we have to recognize that, just as Nan had said earlier, that they want to join a company, not because of what it does, but because of what it's about, that culture thing. Why do we exist and why do we do it the way we do it every single time? They need to buy into that. So wages are a tool that we have, but if we depend on wages, we will generally lose. We're losing out to the gig economy jobs that people get the hours that they want when they want them at very competitive wages. We're losing out to new economy jobs like the Amazon warehouse and distribution center jobs, where they're getting benefits from day one, right? Maybe it's a hard job, but they get predictable schedule and benefits from day one. Walmart is paying very, very high wages. Again, benefits extremely early. We're competing with those. We can win if we start to re-inject that purpose. People like travel, and people who like people will never find a better industry than ours, because we run on people. We are a people-powered business for people who love people. If you're one of those folks, you should want to work with us. We need to get back to that. Go back to, again, what Nan was saying about leverage the culture, leverage the why, not just the what.
All right, we are up to our last question, and I will start with Nan. And I'm going to same question to all of you. If you were sitting down with someone who is leading their hotel or hotels and operations, and you were to offer them any advice for 2022 on how they can be successful, what would that advice be?
They're leading their hotel. That's a really good question. And I guess I'll just go back to Intermountain. That's always my go-to. I think we have a story to tell. It started 40 years ago. And, when we onboard our teams, we have an Intermountain video that talks about how the company started. And we try to have them just hold on to that. I had a general manager that I was interviewing for one of our hotels in was Clackamas. And my mother is a part of that video, and she's still living. She's almost 95. And after we went through the interview, he found out that, I was related, and he just made the comment. He said, after all the things we talked about, the hotel was newly renovated and all the positive things, he said, do you think I could meet your mother at some point in time? So I think in our company, it's that. And we have a little phrase that I will share with you, and then I'll pass it on. And it's just kind of something that we came up with as a group, but it just kind of simply states, I think it kind of lets us all kind of hold on to that, just a small phrase. And we talk about our industry, that's the business of 1,000 details. And that's kind of Dewey's, it's our tagline on our business cards, but our owner, that's something he's always said, and we all just kind of ingrained in us. So and then we talk about our company, which is little moves that became a journey. And then our associates are part of our family. So I think if we just keep focused on that, and I do think, what we have found is some of the incentives we put in place, it held on to them for a bit. But I do think, I think rate of pay is important as well, because we have a lot of folks that work for us that are single family providers, so or single parent providers. So anyway, I think that's our niche that I'm going to hold on to, is our culture, because I think we have it, and we've had it. And I think sometimes we don't realize we have it because we get lost in some of the numbers, but we kind of just go back to, or I go back to that. So that's it.
Aaron, what about you? You're sitting down talking to someone who is in operations in our industry, and you're giving them advice for 2022. What would that advice be?
So I would say, first, for hospitality employers, strip away as many non-essential administrative tasks, conference calls, etc., that you possibly can off of the hotel's plates. If it is not necessary and not truly impacting performance, take it away. Strip it down to the bare minimum, and then tell your hotel leaders, get back to leading by walking around, the basics of our business. You've got to be with your people. The onboarding that Dell has spoken a lot about, that's been just a critical focus on us. Invest that time up front with your people. Have lunch with that new associate on the first day, as a general manager. Spend time, observing a few check-ins during the day and providing some feedback to that front desk agent. That shows that you care. Get into a couple of guest rooms every day. Provide some feedback to that room attendant, to that housekeeping supervisor. So just be present, lead by walking around, be with your associates and your guests. We're a people business. Get out of the office.
Ron, same question.
I would agree with both what Nan and Aaron said. And really, I gave them the same advice that I did when I was a general manager. I really looked at those departments and those associates and really tried to create advocates. I wanted people to come to work that wanted to come to work because they enjoyed the culture and they thrived in it. And I think that's different than a person coming to work to pick up a paycheck. So really looking at each department and understanding, how many advocates do I have for me as the general manager that want to come to work and want to be successful? And in order to do that, you got to invest in your people. So as Aaron said, it's about spending time with them and helping them achieve their goals.
Dell, you will get the final word.
Wow, that's exciting. Well, I'm not going to touch culture, since you heard from Intermountain we heard from Real, and we've heard from Crestline. They know a lot more about culture than I do. But I will tell you is that, and I realize this is not an industry where that people join because they love math, but data is your friend as an owner, as an operator, as a manager, and using data rather than just your gut is going to help guide you through a very volatile period. We're going to see some strong demand in crazy patterns. We're going to have to plan for that every single day. We need to plan 3 months out. We need to plan a week out. We need to plan 1 day out and adjust staffing levels, adjust workload, make sure that we aren't caught off guard and playing catch up, which forces us to close rooms and minimize or not maximize our revenue potential during this, what should be a great period. It also, this is going to allow us to serve the guest better. And I can't stress this enough. If we don't get this right, this demand season during Revenge Travel 2.0, we are handing business to Airbnb, and that's not where we win, right? We differentiate ourselves on service and hospitality. And if we don't deliver that right because we have staffed improperly, we're going to be paying for that for a long time.
Well, thanks for mentioning Airbnb, Del. As you know, we we work to make sure they play by the rules all across the country every day. So look, on behalf of Aaron and Ron and Nan and Del, thank you so much for being part of this program today, to both my panelists and all of you that are watching. And thanks so much for many of the questions. And don't forget, this information from this entire panel will be part of the Hotel Business February issue. And of course, you can always see that at hotelbusiness.com and also on both LinkedIn and Twitter. So thanks again, everybody, and we'll hope to see you again soon.
Thanks for the conversation, Chip.
Bye-bye.